The United States and Europe just announced that they're getting into another tariff battle, this time over the country of Greenland. This can move some sectors and stocks explosively this week, and we're going to go through all of those and more. I'm Chris with Investors Underground, and this is Sunday Scan. Every single week, we go over the most in play news, tickers, and themes so that you can get prepared to trade the market in the week ahead. We have a great Sunday Scan coming up for you, and we're going to go over a bunch of concepts and different trading ideas so that you can really succeed in the market in the week ahead. So let's get right into it. The big news this week is really that the US and Europe are getting into it again. And there's also a wrench that could be thrown into this because the Supreme Court has a decision to make on the tariffs, if they're even legal, if they can even do them. So at the same time, you have a tariff battle heating up between the United States and Europe. You also have the question of can they even have tariffs in that manner? So you could have some explosive moves this week, and it's going to spill into a couple of sectors that we're going to get into. Before we get into that and pull up some charts, I'm going to give the disclaimer now that I'm not a financial advisor, and these are not buy or sell recommendations. Everything I'm going to go through is for educational and informational purposes only. So now let's get right into some chart share. One of the first things that really comes to mind as this whole saga plays out between the US and Europe are European defense names. So, for a little bit of context and history, the United States, as being partnered with NATO, they've provided a lot of the defense spending over the last couple of decades. So, what's happening is as you have a potential decoupling between the US and NATO and Europe, is that you're going to have the European countries spend a lot more money on their own defense. And really, what that spills into is the 10 or 15 European defense names that can benefit from that. And so, as they increase production, they'll get more revenue, and that'll be a bigger share of GDP for the European countries. And so, you have a couple of these ETFs that are going to track that theme, and that's EUAD and NATO. These are a couple ones that will be in play over this upcoming week and that I have on watch. So while these aren't usually in play, you could see that over the last couple of weeks, as this news has been heating up, these are definitely in play and they're breaking out, increased volume, increased range. And so these are going to be on watch for continuation, especially as you get more negative headlines between the US and the EU. So those are going to be a couple of things to keep on watch this week. But there's a few other names that might not be on your radar that can get caught in a crossfire between these kind of tariff battles. One of these is Spot. So Spotify is actually a European company that has been hit pretty hard as this news has been playing out. And the reason for that is that Europe tends to play different games with the Magnificent Seven tech names, the big technology names in the US. They'll do things with taxes, regulations, and it's basically a matter of them kind of defining their own regulation and then hitting those companies with fines. And then in response, the US says that they might target some European companies if that continues. And so with this new news, you can have Spotify get in the crossfires of this because Spotify specifically has been called out in the past as kind of a pawn that can be played by the US to basically pressure Europe into doing some things. So there's a couple of companies like Spotify that I think are going to be under increased pressure as this theme kind of plays out. And that's not the only one. So Spotify is one, but another one is NVO. So NVO is a major company out of Denmark. And so if the US actually wants to put a lot of pressure on Denmark, then I have a feeling that they'll most likely be targeting this. This is one of the largest companies in Europe, and they're hugely exposed to the U.S. market through some of the weight loss products that they have. And so I think that there's a good possibility that we might see some headlines around the U.S. threatening to either instill greater tariffs on European pharmaceutical companies or some kind of pressure to hopefully, let the EU let go of Greenland from the U.S.'s perspective. And so that's another name that could potentially be caught in the crossfire here. And then another one is Deutsche Bank. And so this is a large European bank that is, very intertwined with the European financial system. And so as you have these kind of big headlines and these uncertainties heating up, a lot of times financials get hit hard, and especially European financials can get hit very hard if that actually escalates. So we don't exactly know yet, how severe this can be because the Supreme Court in the U.S. actually has to approve or deny or basically clarify the use of tariffs and see how that kind of spills into both markets. So the Supreme Court's supposed to issue another ruling on I believe Tuesday, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about the tariffs, but it could come any day or any time this week or in the next couple of weeks. But that is going to be a major, major decision that can spill into a lot of different markets. And then another company that can be affected by this is we've been all over this CRML move. So this is basically a mining company that has exposure to Greenland. And so the thought process is that if there's a way to play kind of the Greenland theme in general, then this is one of the only like pure plays to really participate in that. And the thought process is that as the U.S. If it gets access to the Greenland market, then you could open it up to mining rights and things like that. And this is a mining company who just signed a pretty major deal over the last week. So this has had a huge move up since the start of the year. You can see from that $7 area all the way up to about that $19 level. So coming up on almost a triple there. And this one looks like it's just consolidating a little bit. And I think that we could potentially have another move up. There's a couple of cases where I think that this could be in for a reversal or a short term kind of consolidation. And that is if we have timeline news. So, what I mean by that is that everyone's expecting this kind of Greenland thing to play out over the next couple of weeks. But if they're saying that they can be negotiating for the next, 3, 4, 5 months, and they're, giving some time towards like the middle of the summer, the end of the summer, then that could really take some of the excitement out of like a near term catalyst for that. So if the US and the EU just kind of go back and forth on some of these tariff initiatives, then that could be one reason why I see, you could have a big mean reversion here. But until that is really, prominently talked about, I think that we'll just kind of consolidate and most likely continue higher with small pockets of volatility or pullbacks there until we get a true extension. I think that we'll most likely have another move like we did sometime last year. A couple other things that could be impacted this week, gold and silver. So silver has been on this epic run. We've talked about it a lot. We had some good mean reversion trades. It's been back in trending. And really, there's a couple of things that I want to talk about here. One of the things is that a lot of people seem to be getting pretty frustrated trading silver. And I want to go over a couple of reasons why that might be. One is that commodity markets in general trade differently than equity markets. They trade differently than stocks. They trade differently specifically than small caps. And there's a reason for that. If you were to look at the life cycle of a small cap or something that is, used to being traded by a lot of active traders, you usually have some kind of a small cap put out a press release or become a part of a theme, and it usually gets some excitement, and then it runs up for a couple of days, maybe has a huge overextension, and then maybe the company does an offering or something like that to kind of break that tension, and then you have supply increase, the hype goes away, and you have these massive round trips. So we see this all the time in different names in small caps. And so a lot of people are used to trading cycles with that short of a time frame. With commodities, it's a little bit different. One of the reasons is that a lot of this run up has been from a kind of financialized products. So futures trading, there's different options contracts. There's a lot of things that are kind of spilling into the commodities market that can impact the short term volatility. But if you were to look at a commodity cycle in general, it takes a lot longer for that same type of supply to come onto the market. So how it works in commodities is that you usually have some kind of fundamental or a story narrative that kind of picks up. In this case, it's a whole combination of things with tightness in the silver market, but then there's also economic policies where you have basically a ton of money flooding the markets. You have some more easy Fed policies, and so all that money needs like a blow off valve. And so historically, that's kind of been more gold and crypto, specifically Bitcoin. But as Bitcoin has really just been consolidating for the last, several months, especially after a lot of the treasury companies kind of blew out that market. Now it needs to work through all that supply. What you had happen is that I think silver took a lot of the spotlight from that kind of blow off valve from a lot of these economic policies. So you have a ton of money flowing into silver over this multi-month trend, but then it takes time for the silver miners to actually increase enough production for the market to come back into balance. So if you already have a tight silver market and then you have all these highly financialized products, these highly leveraged products, you're just going to get these periods of huge overextension with some pullbacks along the way, but you don't necessarily have a full cycle change until you have some of the physical spot market kind of come back into balance. And so that could happen in a few different ways. One, from the actual silver miners themselves increasing supply, or you could have some potential news that impacts some other things. So, for instance, if the US Supreme Court rules that the tariffs can actually stay, then that changes a lot. that could potentially strengthen the US dollar, that could reduce deficits, and that could do a couple of things that could really disrupt the easy money policy narrative or the huge deficit and easy financial stimulus narrative that's been going on. So that's one thing that I see could cause a big mean reversion in the price of silver. Another thing is that if you have these different countries and kind of clearinghouses start to put on tighter and tighter regulations. So China just announced that they're doing some things with smaller lot sizes being allowed for silver, or like capping the amount that individual players can kind of move the market. You have things with margin increases, and that taking different forms with options and everything. So you have these like different things that are kind of piling up. But I think it would take a real narrative shift in either the Supreme Court with tariffs or possibly something with the Fed direction to really cause a massive cycle change until the actual market in silver comes back into play. Now, that being said, you can get these pockets of like mini mean reversions. And so basically, a mean reversion is just a trend that is overextended, falling back to a more reasonable trend. So if you were to draw trend lines around here, you can see it starting to speed up here. And so if it were to really mean revert, it could fall back to more general levels, maybe somewhere in the low 70s. And so it's very possible that that happens in the upcoming week with some of these tariff headlines around it. But I just want to give a little bit of that context with silver and with commodities and how they trade a little bit differently than some of the more small cap or the stocks that a lot of people are trading. I see a lot of people getting frustrated with it too. It's fine to try mean reversion trades in silver frequently, but you have to take into account that they might be a little bit more shallow and they might recover a little bit faster than some of the other things that people are used to. So it's fine to try it, but you cannot be overly stubborn or force a bias. You really just want to go with the path of least resistance. Sometimes that's a mean reversion. Sometimes it's staying with the trend overall. So the same thing really applies to gold here, and especially with some of these tariff wars kind of heating up, that can spill into gold as well. So I think that these will all be very much in play over the coming week ahead. Now let's get into some main watches for the week. The first one that I really want to go over is this BE. So I talked about this, and I actually gave a video to IU members going over in detail of why I think that this could have a massive move to the upside and breakout. So this has been in place since last year, and we've talked a lot about these concepts of these higher lows, a new theme, fundamentals kind of getting priced in. It's in a good sector. It's in the AI power supply sector. So basically, as all these AI data centers need more power, this can provide some on-site power through fuel cell and battery. And so basically, that's been resulting in a lot of deal flow, hundreds of millions or billions of dollars for this company as all these different companies try to kind of do a plug and play power supply for the data center. So that's why this company has been in play and they continue to get positive news flow. You had a big shakeout at the end of last year. We actually played some downside in this too. Kind of had a head and shoulders pattern here, shoulder, head, shoulder, and then it kind of flushed down, a symmetrical amount from here. And so we played some of that, but now it's back into trend. And after the tax loss selling of last year, it's very much back in a positive trend here. Now, usually with swing trades or fundamental trades, after a big move up like this, you would expect it to run into some resistance and maybe fail. And that's possible. And we had a little bit of consolidation. But another thing that's been key with this name is that you've had a lot of positive catalysts. And so deal flow, things like that, that kind of resets the clock. So if there was just one catalyst that caused this whole move up, that's very different than a catalyst. And then a couple of weeks later, a catalyst, and a couple of weeks later, another catalyst. It's kind of ratcheting up. Where is that fundamental support along the way? And so, even though yes, it's had a big move up here, after a little bit of consolidation, it can very easily start to go. And I think that this could be testing, get up to 200 or even past that in the coming weeks. So I think in the next week we're going to have a big breakout as long as the market kind of holds up. Ariel talks a lot about how, when the markets are volatile. So let's say we have a big dip on Tuesday or something like that. It's possible that these names just kind of consolidate until that market dip is over. So when the markets are dipping, you usually want to track strength in names like this as opposed to actually trading it. But once the market is risk on again, once the market is green, once the market is going, and you see other things are having breakouts that are working, then that is a great time to participate in some of those massive breakout moves. So I talked a little bit about in the video that I did for Investors Underground, some of the fundamental reasons for the move that I see coming. But I also like to see these rejections initially, because what that's doing is if there's supply in this area, let's say it's 20 million shares, 15 million shares, the more times it tests that, the more it's knocking that down. So maybe there's only 15 million shares or 10 million shares or 5 million shares kind of, net to be sold in this area. And once it breaks out, that's all-time highs. And so if you have actual themes that are in play, if you have fundamental reasons for it, if you have technical reasons for it, and if you have it knocking down that supply and all you have left in are basically shorts, then that could be a big squeeze up and move in a stock like PE in the week ahead. So I already have some positioning into this, and I'll be looking to add to maybe some options positioning, maybe some call options in the week ahead as this hopefully breaks out and has a massive move towards the 200 area over the course of maybe a week or two. Um, Another name that I want to track is this AG. So we talked about silver, the spot price of silver, but something that I think is really going to happen, and I've mentioned this before, is I think that the silver miners are going to massively outperform physical silver at this point. And the reason for that is that silver miners and silver royalty companies, they make their money when the price of silver goes up, but it takes a while for that to filter through into their earnings. And so you've had the price of silver basically double over the last couple of months, but things like AG and these other silver companies, they haven't really reported too many quarters of earnings. So you haven't been able to see that flow into their income statement and into their balance sheet. And so what I think is going to happen is as you have these companies start to report earnings, you're going to see massive increases in margins and revenue. And I think that's going to be a huge fundamental backdrop for why these can outperform. So I see this continuing higher, even if silver kind of stalls out or even if silver mean reverts. Maybe you'll have a couple of days of volatility, but over the next couple of months, I think that you're going to see some very large moves in these silver companies as they kind of catch up to the price of silver. A couple other names I want to go over for potential upside. IREN. There's a couple other names in kind of the crypto AI, compute sector. And as they're getting a little bit more stringent on the regulations about these different AI companies and AI data centers, basically, spiking prices in the grid, they're going to be looking for more plug and play types of companies to either acquire or to help them to basically scale some of their compute. So IREM, it ran a lot last year on that narrative, and now that narrative is back. And so I think we're going to see some more continuation. Yes, maybe it'll exhaust out and stall up, but that's plenty of room before it runs into some major resistance. So that will be on watch for some upside. Software names. I think these will be on watch for a potential bounce. These have been under a lot of pressure and money has been leaving. And that's usually a sign that you want to participate in the downside. But as you can see, these have had some very major moves and they're coming into some big support levels. And so after a very large move like that, and is coming into a support level, that's usually when you get some really good bounce trades. And so what I've been looking for is potentially some gap downs or some big flushes into those low like 220 levels, and then to see if we can have kind of that stall out, maybe a big capitulation, and volume candle increase into that level, and then looking for a little bit of a bounce, not for a trend change, but just for a bounce. So if you want to participate in a bounce like that, there's a couple things that you really need to look for. There's a couple things that I really look for. One is you want to see the rate of change increase. So you've already had some big moves on the way down. I want to see it puke out and basically shake out all the longs that are in here. And then I want to see a wick like that on the bottom. So after it starts to basically base a little bit, I want to see some sort of a higher low. You can use a 5-minute time frame, a 3-minute time frame, some kind of smaller time frame to see after this big capitulation out, maybe on a gap down or something. I want to see it start to build a higher low. And then you can use that bottom wick as kind of your risk point. So as long as it stays above that bottom wick, you can participate in a bounce. And maybe you can use call options or maybe just common equity for that. But if it gets below that wick, then it's a sign to stop out, and maybe that same trade happens again at a lower level. So CRM, TEAM, those are all on watch for that. You can see that kind of capitulatory or that puking action where all the longs are just kind of liquidating right now as these are getting repriced. And a lot of these were at very high multiples and valuations. And as AI is disrupting their businesses, it's justified that these names are selling off. But after, big moves like that, there's a pretty high chance that they bounce at some point. So participating in a bounce like that, and then, if you flip to short right after that, totally fine. But a lot of times after this kind of price action, you're going to get a pretty good size bounce. Rocket Lab and ASTS. So the space theme has been in full force, one of the leading sectors of 2026. And part of the reason for that is that the US is doing the Golden Dome. So basically, a lot of defense budgets are going into like aerial defense systems, space themes, and everything like that. And so as some of these companies get contracts in that space, that is what's driving them up fundamentally. And so you can see pretty steady trends here. And I think we're going to get some acceleration or some big moves. And we saw that. So like Rocket Lab has been pretty, in theme and in play, but ASTS has been really accelerating. So as you can see, after this trend, it started to speed up, and that's an exhaustion gap right there. So Typically, after exhaustion gaps, we get some consolidation, some mean reversion. So that'll be on watch for a mean reversion in the week ahead. While some other names like Rocket Lab, it's more just kind of testing the upper end of some of those trend lines. So, yes, that can have a mean reversion, but it's not as solid as the mean reversion potentially from ASTS. So, nothing to fight, but if they start to act heavy, if they need a couple of days to consolidate, that's something I'm interested in with either puts or someone could short equity against a level if they're into that. Netflix has earnings this upcoming week as we are starting earnings season. So I think that this could be on watch. I don't have a bias on it yet. Yes, it's been trending down, but I think that you could have a pretty explosive move one way or the other with earnings. So I just like to see what those earnings are, and then I'll form a trade plan around that. FCX, this is a copper name. A lot of the metals and commodities have been in play, like we talked about. But I think that if we see some things with the tariffs, with the Supreme Court, there's a decent chance that we could have a big flush and mean reversion in copper, especially if some of the tariff things and then some of the tensions in the world are starting to play out. You could have a 1 or 2 day really sharp mean reversion in the price of copper, which has been very high recently. So if copper flushes, then FCX would be my go-to for a big mean reversion trade there. And yes, this doesn't have to move huge, especially if you're playing options, because the implied volatility is usually very low with these, and so even small moves can have big, multi-baggers in the put options. A couple other themes: rare earths. So you've seen UU energy fuels really have a nice recovery to start the year. Again, as global tensions rise, that could spark more tensions with China, with all these other countries, and so a sweet spot where money is flowing to is the critical minerals and the rare earths. So that goes for UU, and also MP. That is starting to break out a little bit as well. Small caps, a little bit on watch is this EVTV for a potential liquidity trap. So it had that massive couple of days with what was it, 700 million volume, and then it was followed by 250 million volume, and then it dropped out to some really much lower numbers. So as you kind of get into the week ahead, I think we're going to potentially see this grind back up. And if it triggers, it could have a nice secondary squeeze out move there. And then the last one is this ONDS. Well, this is a drone name, and as some of these space names and the drone names have been very strong, this had some exhaustion gaps, and now it's starting to fail to follow through. And so I think that this could mean revert back to some of these levels here. So I will be watching that in the week ahead. So hopefully that was helpful for you. I tried to get through everything pretty thoroughly and pretty quickly. Again, hopefully these are making sense to you. And if you need some actual trading setup to trade some of these tickers that I'm talking about, definitely check out the Legends Playbook, as 8 traders that are fantastic, world-class multimillionaire traders really shared an in-depth strategy. Each one of them shared a setup that they use. So for instance, whether it's like a panic dip buy, whether it's a blow off top and mean reversion trade, whether it's an episodic pivot, something that's very news based, or whether it's like an overnight small cap gapper, we have strategies for all of those. And you can see, the information on that. Click the website in the comment that we will include in this post. So that's really all I have for this week. Again, Traders for a Cause is coming up at the end of February. So make sure that you check out tickets for that. It's going to be in Miami. It's going to be a great time. And so many traders are going to be there networking and giving to great causes. So that's all I have for this week's Sunday Scan. Make sure that you please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.